The waitress set the wine glass down in front of her, and Margaret didn't touch it. She just stared at it. Red wine. The kind David used to order for her when they were young. When he still looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. But David wasn't here tonight. He was 3 tables away. With someone else. Margaret's daughter, Claire, reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Mom, we can leave. Right now. We don't have to stay. But Margaret shook her head slowly. She didn't look away from that wine glass. No, she said softly. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. Before we continue, if this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. And it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Across the restaurant, David laughed. That same laugh she'd heard for 32 years. The laugh that used to make her feel safe. Now it made her chest ache. The woman with him was younger. Not dramatically younger, but enough. Enough that Margaret felt every one of her 57 years pressing down on her shoulders. Claire leaned in closer. Mom, please. Let's just go home. Margaret finally looked up at her daughter. Claire had her father's eyes. Warm. Worried. Full of love. I'm not running, Margaret said quietly. Not anymore. It had been 8 months since the divorce was finalized. 8 months since David moved out of the house they'd built together. 8 months since he told her he needed something different. She had cried for 3 of those months. Then she stopped. Not because the pain stopped, but because she realized something. She had spent 32 years being David's wife. Being Claire and Michael's mother. Being the woman who kept everyone else's life together. But who was Margaret? She didn't know anymore. The waitress came back. Young. Cheerful. Are you ladies ready to order? Margaret looked down at the menu. She hadn't read a single word. I'll have the salmon, she said. She had no idea if this restaurant even served salmon. The waitress smiled. Great choice. Claire ordered something. Margaret didn't hear what. And then, from across the room, she felt it. Someone was looking at her. Not David. Not the woman with him. Someone else. Margaret turned her head slowly. At the bar, sitting alone with a glass of whiskey, was a man she'd never seen before. He was watching her. Not staring. Just watching. Like he saw something in her face that mattered. Their eyes met. He didn't look away. Neither did she. And for the first time in 8 months, Margaret felt something other than sadness. She felt awake. Margaret turned back to her daughter quickly, her heart beating just a little faster than before. Mom! Claire was looking at her with a strange expression. Are you okay? You look different. I'm fine, Margaret said. But her voice was softer now. Uncertain. She picked up her wine glass and took a sip. It was warm. Rich. She tasted it this time. Claire glanced over her shoulder toward the bar, then back at her mother. Was someone looking at you? Margaret set the glass down carefully. I don't know. But she did know. She could still feel his gaze. Even now. Even though she wasn't looking at him anymore. Mom! Claire's voice was serious now. You don't have to pretend with me. I know this is hard. Seeing Dad here. With her. Margaret reached across the table and held both of her daughter's hands. Claire, listen to me. I am okay. I promise. But, I mean it. Margaret squeezed gently. I loved your father. I still do, in a way. But that part of my life is over. And I'm learning to be okay with that. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I just don't want you to be alone. I'm not alone, Margaret said. I have you. I have Michael. I have a life that's still mine. Claire smiled, but it was a sad smile. The kind that said she didn't quite believe it. The food came. Margaret ate slowly. She didn't taste much of it, but she ate. And she didn't look at the bar again. But she wanted to. God, she wanted to. When the meal was finished, Claire excused herself to the restroom. Margaret sat alone at the table, her hands folded in her lap. And then she heard a voice. Excuse me. She looked up. It was him. The man from the bar. He was older than she'd thought. Maybe 60. Maybe a little more. His hair was gray at the temples. His face was lined but kind. He wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans. Nothing fancy. But he carried himself like someone who knew who he was. I'm sorry to bother you, he said. His voice was low. Calm. But I saw you sitting here and I had to say something. Margaret's throat tightened. Say what? He smiled. It was a small smile. Sad, almost. That you're the most beautiful woman in this room. Margaret blinked. She didn't know what to say. I don't mean that the way it sounds, he continued. I'm not trying to. I just mean, you look like someone who's been through something. And you're still here. Still sitting up straight. Still present. That's rare. Margaret felt something crack open inside her chest. Something she'd been holding closed for a very long time. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once. I'll leave you alone now. I just wanted you to know. He turned to walk away. And Margaret did something she never thought she'd do. Wait, she said. He stopped. She didn't know why she said it. She didn't know what she was doing. But she couldn't let him walk away. Not yet. What's your name? She asked. He turned back. His eyes were warm. Steady. Thomas, he said. I'm Margaret. It's nice to meet you, Margaret. There was a long silence. Not awkward. Just full. Would you like to sit down? Margaret heard herself say. Thomas looked at her carefully. Are you sure? She nodded. Yes. He sat down across from her, in the chair where Claire had been. And just like that, Margaret's life began to change. Thomas folded his hands on the table. He didn't lean back. He didn't look around the room. He just looked at her. I don't usually do this, he said. Do what? Margaret asked. Talk to strangers in restaurants. Margaret smiled a little. Neither do I. But you seemed. He paused, searching for the word. Real. Margaret tilted her head. Real. Most people wear masks, Thomas said. Especially in places like this. But you weren't wearing one. I could see everything on your face. The sadness. The strength. The wondering. Margaret felt her cheeks flush. You saw all that. I did. She looked down at her hands. I didn't know I was that easy to read. It's not a bad thing, Thomas said gently. It means you're honest. Even with yourself. Margaret looked up at him. Are you always this direct? Only when it matters. There was something in his voice. Something that made her believe him. What were you wondering? He asked. Margaret frowned. What do you mean? You said you didn't know you were easy to read. But I saw you wondering something. What was it? Margaret hesitated. She didn't know this man. She didn't know him an answer. But she wanted to give him one. I was wondering, she said slowly, if I'm still the kind of woman someone would choose. Thomas didn't react right away. He just watched her. What makes you think you're not? He asked. Margaret laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. I'm 57 years old. I just went through a divorce after 32 years of marriage. My ex-husband is 3 tables away with a woman who looks like she still knows how to be wanted. And you don't. I don't know, Margaret admitted. I don't know who I am anymore. Thomas leaned forward just a little. Can I tell you something? Okay. I've been sitting at that bar for an hour, he said. I've seen a lot of people come and go. And I didn't look at any of them the way I looked at you. Margaret's breath caught. You want to know why? Thomas continued. Because you're not trying to be anything other than what you are. You're not performing. You're not hiding. You're just here. And that's more attractive than anything else in this room. Margaret felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back. I don't even know you, she whispered. I know, Thomas said. But maybe that's the point. Before Margaret could respond, Claire returned to the table. She stopped when she saw Thomas. Oh, Claire said, looking between them. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Thomas stood immediately. You're not interrupting. I was just leaving. He looked at Margaret one more time. It was nice to meet you, Margaret. You too, she said. He turned to walk away. Claire sat down slowly, her eyes wide. Mom, who was that? Margaret watched Thomas return to the bar. He picked up his glass of whiskey and took a sip. He didn't look back at her. But she couldn't stop looking at him. I don't know, Margaret said softly. He was looking at you like. Claire trailed off. Like what? Claire smiled. A real smile this time. Like you were the only person in the room. Margaret didn't sleep well that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over in her mind. You're not trying to be anything other than what you are. No one had said anything like that to her in years. David used to compliment her. But it was always about what she did. How she kept the house. How she raised the kids. How she made his life easier. Never about who she was. Thomas hadn't asked her what she did. He hadn't asked if she had children, or where she worked, or what her hobbies were. He had just seen her, and that terrified her. Because she didn't know if she wanted to be seen. Not yet. Maybe not ever. When the sun finally came up, Margaret got out of bed and made herself a cup of tea. She sat at the kitchen table in her robe, looking out at the backyard. The house was quiet. Too quiet. This was David's house once. Their house. Now it was just hers. She didn't know if she liked that or not. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from Claire. How are you feeling today, Mom? Margaret smiled. Claire had been checking on her every day since the divorce. Sometimes twice a day. I'm okay, sweetheart. Just having tea. Did you sleep? A little. There was a pause. Then another text. Are you going to see him again? Margaret stared at the message. She hadn't even considered it. Had she? She set the phone down without answering. The truth was, she didn't know how to see him again. She didn't have his number. She didn't know where he lived or what he did, or if he was even single. For all she knew, he was married. The thought made her stomach twist. She picked up her phone again and typed. I don't even know him, Claire. But you want to. Margaret didn't respond. Because Claire was right. She did want to. 3 days passed. Margaret went back to her routine. She worked part-time at a bookstore in town. She had coffee with her friend Linda. She called Michael, her son, who lived 2 hours away with his wife and baby. She tried not to think about Thomas. But she did. Every night before she fell asleep, she thought about the way he looked at her. The way he spoke. The way he made her feel like she mattered. On Thursday afternoon, Margaret finished her shift at the bookstore and decided to walk home instead of drive. It was a beautiful day. Warm. Clear. She passed the flower shop on Main Street. And she stopped. There, standing at the counter inside, was Thomas. Margaret's heart jumped into her throat. He was buying flowers. A small bouquet of white roses. She stood outside the window, frozen. Should she go in? Should she walk away? Before she could decide, Thomas turned toward the door. Their eyes met through the glass. He smiled. Margaret's hands trembled. Thomas walked outside, the bouquet in his hand. Margaret, he said. Hi, she whispered. They stood there on the sidewalk, just looking at each other. I didn't think I'd see you again, Thomas said. I didn't think I'd see you either. He held up the flowers. These are for my mother. She's in a care home a few blocks from here. That's kind of you. She doesn't always remember who I am anymore, Thomas said quietly. But she still loves flowers. Margaret's chest tightened. I'm sorry. It's okay, Thomas said. It's just life. There was a long silence. Would you like to walk with me? Thomas asked. I'm heading there now. Margaret hesitated. She should say no. She should go home. But she didn't want to. Okay, she said. They walked side by side down the street. Neither of them spoke for a while. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was just quiet. Can I ask you something? Thomas said finally. Yes. The other night. At the restaurant. You said you didn't know if you were still the kind of woman someone would choose. Margaret nodded. What made you think that? He asked. Margaret took a breath. Because my husband left me. After 32 years. And I keep wondering what I did wrong. Thomas stopped walking. He turned to face her. Margaret, he said. You didn't do anything wrong. You don't know that. Yes, I do. How? Because, Thomas said. If someone leaves you, it's not because you weren't enough. It's because they didn't know how to see what they had. Margaret felt tears slide down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. He handed it to her. I'm sorry, Margaret whispered. Don't be, Thomas said. Crying means you're still feeling. And that's a good thing. Margaret wiped her eyes. Thank you, she said. Thomas smiled. Come on. My mother's waiting. They kept walking. And Margaret realized something. She didn't feel alone anymore. The care home smelled like lavender and medicine. Margaret followed Thomas through the front doors, past the reception desk, down a hallway lined with soft yellow walls and framed paintings of flowers. She's in room 12, Thomas said quietly. They stopped in front of a door with a small wooden sign that read Eleanor. Thomas knocked gently, then pushed the door open. Inside, an elderly woman sat in a chair by the window. She was small, fragile. Her white hair was brushed neatly, and she wore a pale blue cardigan. Hi, Mom, Thomas said softly. Eleanor turned her head slowly. Her eyes were cloudy, but they brightened when she saw him. Thomas, she said. Her voice was thin, shaky. You came. I always come, he said. He walked over and kissed her on the forehead, then held out the flowers. I brought these for you. Eleanor took the bouquet in her small hands and brought it to her nose. She closed her eyes and smiled. White roses, she whispered. Your father used to bring me white roses. Thomas glanced at Margaret, then back at his mother. I know, Mom. Eleanor opened her eyes and looked past Thomas. She saw Margaret standing in the doorway. Who's this? Eleanor asked. Thomas turned. This is Margaret. She's a friend. Margaret stepped inside. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Just call me Eleanor, dear, the woman said. She studied Margaret with sharp, curious eyes. You're very pretty. Margaret smiled. Thank you. Eleanor looked at Thomas. Is she your sweetheart? Thomas's face flushed. Mom, we just met. But you brought her here, Eleanor said. You never bring anyone here. Margaret's heart skipped. Thomas cleared his throat. I thought you'd like some company. Eleanor reached out and took Margaret's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Sit with me, dear, she said. Margaret looked at Thomas. He nodded. She sat down in the chair next to Eleanor. Tell me, Eleanor said. How did you meet my son? Margaret glanced at Thomas. He was watching her with that same steady gaze. We met at a restaurant, Margaret said. He said something kind to me. That sounds like him, Eleanor said. She looked at Thomas with so much love it made Margaret's chest ache. He's always been kind, even when his heart was broken. Thomas's jaw tightened. Mom! It's true, Eleanor said. She looked back at Margaret. His wife left him 5 years ago. Ran off with someone else. Took everything but his dignity. Margaret felt her breath catch. I didn't know, she whispered. Why would you? Eleanor said. He doesn't talk about it, but I see it in his eyes. He's lonely. Mom, Thomas said quietly. That's enough. Eleanor ignored him. She squeezed Margaret's hand. Don't let him push you away, dear. He's good at that. But he needs someone. Someone who sees him. Margaret didn't know what to say. She just nodded. Eleanor smiled. Good. They left the care home half an hour later. Thomas was quiet as they walked back toward Main Street. His hands were in his pockets. His eyes were on the ground. I'm sorry about that, he said finally. Sorry for what? Margaret asked. For my mother. She shouldn't have said those things. She was just being honest. She was being nosy, Thomas said. But there was a smile in his voice. Margaret laughed softly. She loves you. I know. They walked in silence for a moment. Is it true? Margaret asked. What she said? About your wife. Thomas stopped walking. He looked at her. Yes, he said. It's true. Margaret nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Don't be, Thomas said. It was a long time ago. Does it still hurt? Thomas considered the question. Sometimes. But not the way it used to. What changed? I did, he said. I stopped waiting for her to come back. I stopped thinking I did something wrong. And I started living again. Margaret felt something shift inside her. How did you do that? She asked. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. I stopped looking backward, he said. And I started looking forward. Margaret's throat tightened. That sounds easier than it is, she said. It is, Thomas agreed. But it's worth it. They reached the flower shop where they'd met earlier. Margaret's car was parked just down the street. This is me, she said. Thomas nodded. It was good to see you again, Margaret. You too. She turned to walk away. Margaret, Thomas called. She stopped. Would you like to have coffee with me sometime? He asked. Just coffee. No pressure. Just two people talking. Margaret's heart pounded. She should say no. She should tell him she wasn't ready. But when she opened her mouth, different words came out. Yes, she said. I'd like that. Thomas smiled. A real smile. The kind that reached his eyes. How about Saturday morning? He said. There's a little cafe on Maple Street. 9 o'clock. Okay. Okay. Margaret got into her car. Her hands were shaking as she started the engine. As she drove away, she looked in the rearview mirror. Thomas was still standing there, watching her go, and Margaret realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. That night, Margaret's phone rang. It was Michael. Hi, sweetheart, she said. Hey, Mom. Her son's voice was warm. Tired, but warm. How are you? I'm good, Margaret said. How's Emma? How's the baby? They're both great. Sophie's sleeping through the night now. Finally. Margaret smiled. That's wonderful. Mom, I wanted to ask you something. Okay. There was a pause. Claire called me, Michael said. Margaret's stomach sank. What did she say? She said you met someone. Margaret closed her eyes. Claire talks too much. She's worried about you, Mom. We both are. You don't need to worry. But we do, Michael said. You've been through a lot. And we just want to make sure you're okay. I am okay. Are you sure? Margaret sat down on the couch. Michael, I appreciate you calling. I do. But I'm 57 years old. I can make my own decisions. I know that, Mom. I just don't want you to get hurt. I'm not going to get hurt. How do you know? I don't, Margaret admitted. But I can't live my life being afraid of what might happen. Michael was quiet for a long moment. You sound different, Mom, he said. Different how? Stronger. Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. I'm trying to be. I'm proud of you, Michael said. Margaret's voice broke. Thank you, sweetheart. Just promise me something. What? That you'll be careful, Michael said. "And that you'll call me if you need anything. I promise. I love you, Mom." "I love you too." After they hung up, Margaret sat on the couch for a long time. Her children were worried, and maybe they had a right to be. But Margaret wasn't the same woman she'd been 8 months ago. She wasn't even the same woman she'd been a week ago. Something had changed, and she wasn't going to apologize for it. Saturday came faster than Margaret expected. She stood in front of her closet, staring at her clothes like they were written in a foreign language. What did you wear to coffee with a man you barely knew? A man who made you feel alive again. She finally chose a simple blue sweater and jeans. Nothing fancy. Just her. When she arrived at the cafe on Maple Street, Thomas was already there. He was sitting at a table by the window, 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He stood when he saw her. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Margaret said. She sat down. Her hands were trembling slightly. "I wasn't sure what you liked," Thomas said. "So I got you a latte. I hope that's okay." "It's perfect," Margaret said. They sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't awkward. It was just full. "I'm glad you came," Thomas said. "I'm glad I came too." Thomas smiled. "I was afraid you'd change your mind." "I almost did," Margaret admitted. "What stopped you?" Margaret looked down at her coffee. "I realized I was tired of being afraid." Thomas reached across the table. He didn't touch her hand. He just rested his hand next to hers. "You don't have to be afraid with me," he said. Margaret looked up at him. "How do you know?" "Because I'm afraid too." Margaret blinked. "You are?" "Yes," Thomas said. "I'm afraid you'll see all the broken parts of me and decide I'm not worth it." Margaret felt something crack open in her chest. "I don't think that's possible," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because I see you," Margaret said. "And I don't see anything broken. I just see someone who's been through something hard. Just like me." Thomas's eyes glistened. He didn't say anything. He just turned his hand over, palm up. An invitation. Margaret hesitated for only a second. Then she placed her hand in his. And they sat there, 2 people who had been hurt, holding on to something new. They talked for 2 hours. Thomas told her about his job. He was a retired architect. He'd designed buildings all over the country. But now he spent most of his time visiting his mother and taking long walks. Margaret told him about the bookstore. About Claire and Michael. About how much she missed being a mother in the everyday sense, but how proud she was of the people her children had become. "Do you see them often?" Thomas asked. "Claire lives 20 minutes away," Margaret said. "Michael's about 2 hours. I see them when I can." "That must be hard." "It is," Margaret admitted. "But it's also good. They have their own lives now. And I'm learning to have mine." Thomas nodded. "That's not easy." "No," Margaret said. "It's not." They finished their coffee. Thomas walked her to her car. "Can I see you again?" he asked. Margaret smiled. "I'd like that. How about dinner?" "Next Friday." "Okay." Thomas reached out and gently touched her arm. Just a light touch. But it sent warmth through her entire body. "I'm really glad I met you, Margaret," he said. "I'm glad I met you too." As she drove home, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. That week, Margaret's mind was a storm. She kept replaying the coffee date. The way Thomas looked at her. The way he held her hand. But late at night, the doubts crept in. What if he was just being nice? What if he didn't really want her? What if she was reading too much into everything? On Wednesday, Claire stopped by the house. "Mom," she said, setting a bag of groceries on the counter. "You look distracted." "I'm fine," Margaret said. Claire gave her a look. "You're not fine. What's going on?" Margaret sighed. "I'm seeing Thomas again. On Friday." Claire's face lit up. "Mom, that's great." "Is it?" "Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be?" Margaret sat down at the kitchen table. "Because I don't know what I'm doing, Claire. I haven't dated in over 30 years. I don't know how to do this." Claire sat down across from her. "Mom, you don't have to know. You just have to show up." "But what if I mess it up? What if you don't?" Claire said. "What if this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing?" Margaret looked at her daughter. "When did you get so wise?" Claire smiled. "I learned from you." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm scared," Margaret admitted. "I know," Claire said. "But you're also brave. And that's what matters." Friday night arrived. Margaret wore a simple black dress. Nothing too formal. Just elegant. Thomas picked her up at 7. He wore a dark blue shirt and slacks. He looked nervous. "You look beautiful," he said. "Thank you," Margaret said. "You look nice too." They went to a small Italian restaurant on the edge of town. It was quiet. Candlelit. Perfect. They ordered wine. Pasta. They talked about everything and nothing. But halfway through the meal, Thomas went quiet. What is it? Margaret asked. He looked down at his plate. I need to tell you something. Margaret's heart sank. Okay. Thomas looked up at her. I haven't been completely honest with you. Margaret felt her stomach twist. What do you mean? I told you my wife left me 5 years ago, Thomas said. And that's true. But I didn't tell you why. Margaret waited. She left because I was never home, Thomas said. I was always working, always traveling, always putting my career first. And by the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late. Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. That doesn't make you a bad person, she said. Doesn't it? Thomas asked. I had someone who loved me, and I didn't see her. I didn't choose her. And I've regretted that every day since. Margaret squeezed his hand. But you're not that person anymore. How do you know? Because, Margaret said, you're here. With me. And you're not running. You're not hiding. You're choosing to be present. And that's what matters. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For seeing me. Margaret smiled. You did the same for me. After dinner, they walked along the waterfront. The moon was full. The water was calm. Thomas stopped near a bench overlooking the bay. Margaret, he said. She turned to face him. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, Thomas said. But I need to tell you something. Margaret's heart raced. What? I don't want to waste any more time, Thomas said. I'm 62 years old. I've spent too many years living in regret. And I don't want to do that anymore. What are you saying? Thomas stepped closer. I'm saying that I like you. A lot. And I want to see where this goes. If you'll let me. Margaret felt tears slide down her cheeks. I want that too, she whispered. Thomas reached up and gently wiped her tears away with his thumb. Can I kiss you? He asked. Margaret nodded. Thomas leaned in slowly. And when his lips touched hers, Margaret felt like she was falling. Not in a scary way. In a safe way. Like she was finally home. 3 weeks later, Margaret invited Thomas to dinner at her house. Claire and Michael were both coming. Margaret was terrified. What if they don't like him? She asked Claire on the phone. Mom, Claire said. We're going to love him. Because you love him. I didn't say I loved him. You didn't have to. That evening, Thomas arrived with a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers. For the hostess, he said, handing them to Margaret. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. When Claire arrived, she hugged Thomas immediately. It's so nice to finally meet you, she said. You too, Thomas said. Michael was more reserved. He shook Thomas's hand firmly, his eyes assessing. Nice to meet you, sir, Michael said. Call me Thomas, Thomas said. And it's nice to meet you too. They sat down for dinner. At first, the conversation was polite, careful, but slowly it opened up. Michael asked Thomas about his work. Thomas asked Michael about his family. Claire told embarrassing stories about Margaret. And Margaret just sat there, watching. This was her family. And Thomas fit. After dinner, Michael pulled Margaret aside in the kitchen. He's a good guy, Mom, Michael said. You think so? Yeah, Michael said. And more importantly, you're happy. I can see it. Margaret hugged her son tightly. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For letting me do this. Michael pulled back and looked at her. Mom, you don't need our permission to be happy. I know, Margaret said. But it helps. 2 months into their relationship, Margaret and Thomas had their first fight. It started small. Thomas had made plans for them to go to a concert without asking her first. I thought you'd want to go, he said. But you didn't ask me, Margaret said. I was trying to surprise you. I don't like surprises. Thomas frowned. I didn't know that. Well, now you do. They sat in silence in his car. Margaret, Thomas said finally. I'm sorry. I should have asked you first. Margaret crossed her arms. It's not just about the concert, Thomas. Then what is it about? She turned to face him. For 32 years, someone else made decisions for me. David decided where we went. What we did. When we did it. And I just went along with it. Because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. Thomas's expression softened. I didn't know. I'm not angry at you, Margaret said. I'm angry at myself. Because I'm afraid I'm falling into the same pattern. And I can't do that again. Thomas reached for her hand. She let him take it. Margaret, listen to me, he said. I don't want you to go along with anything. I want you to have a voice. I want you to tell me what you want. Even if it means we disagree. But what if we disagree too much? Then we'll figure it out, Thomas said. Together. Because that's what people who care about each other do. Margaret felt the tension in her chest begin to ease. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be sorry, Thomas said. Be honest. Always be honest with me. Margaret nodded. I will. Good. Thomas smiled. Now, do you want to go to this concert, or should I take you home? Margaret thought about it. Actually, I do want to go. But next time, ask me first. Deal, Thomas said. They went to the concert. And Margaret realized something. This was different. Thomas wasn't David. And she wasn't the same woman she used to be. It was a Tuesday afternoon when David called. Margaret was at the bookstore, shelving new arrivals. She almost didn't answer. But something made her pick up. Hello. Margaret. It's me. She hadn't heard his voice in months. David, she said quietly. I hope I'm not bothering you. What do you want? There was a pause. I wanted to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere? Just for coffee. Margaret's hand tightened around the phone. Why? Because I need to see you, David said. Please. Margaret closed her eyes. I don't think that's a good idea. Margaret, please. Just 30 minutes. That's all I'm asking. She should say no. She should hang up. But part of her, the part that had loved him for 32 years, wanted to know what he had to say. Okay, she said. Thursday. 2 o'clock. The cafe on Oak Street. Thank you, David said. Margaret hung up. Her hands were shaking. That night, she told Thomas about the call. They were at his apartment, sitting on the couch. How do you feel about it? Thomas asked. I don't know, Margaret admitted. Part of me doesn't want to see him. But part of me feels like I need to. Thomas nodded slowly. Do you want me to come with you? No, Margaret said. This is something I need to do alone. Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand. Okay, but call me after. I'll be thinking about you. Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder. Thank you. For what? For not being jealous. Thomas kissed the top of her head. I trust you, Margaret. And I trust us. Thursday came. Margaret arrived at the cafe 5 minutes early. She ordered tea and sat at a table by the window. Her heart was pounding. David arrived exactly at 2. He looked the same. A little older. A little grayer. But the same. Margaret, he said. David. He sat down across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Thank you for meeting me, David said finally. What did you want to talk about? David looked down at his hands. I made a mistake. Margaret's stomach dropped. What? Leaving you, David said. It was a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. Margaret felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. David, let me finish, he said. Please. She nodded. I thought I needed something different, David continued. Something new. Someone who made me feel young again. But it was all an illusion. Karen and I, we're not together anymore. We haven't been for months. Margaret's hands trembled. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, David said. I'm telling you because I realized something. I had everything I needed with you. And I threw it away. Margaret's throat tightened. David, why are you telling me this? He looked up at her. His eyes were red. Because I want you back, he said. I want to try again. I want to fix this. Margaret felt tears slide down her cheeks. She thought about the years they'd spent together. The home they'd built. The children they'd raised. The life they'd shared. And then she thought about Thomas. The way he looked at her. The way he listened. The way he chose her every single day. David, she said softly. I loved you. For a very long time. And part of me will always love you. Then come back to me, David said. Please. Margaret shook her head. I can't. Why not? Because you didn't choose me, Margaret said. When it mattered, you chose someone else. And I spent months wondering what was wrong with me. What I did wrong. Why I wasn't enough. You were enough, David said. You were more than enough. Then why did you leave? David looked down. Because I was selfish. Because I was stupid. Because I didn't know what I had until it was gone. Margaret wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, David. But it's too late. It doesn't have to be. Yes, Margaret said. It does. Because I'm not the same woman you left. And I don't want to be. David's face crumpled. Are you seeing someone? Margaret hesitated. Then she nodded. Yes. Is it serious? Yes, Margaret said. It is. David looked at her for a long moment. Does he make you happy? Margaret thought about Thomas. About the way he held her hand. About the way he made her feel seen. Yes, she said. He does. David nodded slowly. Then I'm glad. Are you? No, David admitted. But I want to be. Because you deserve to be happy, Margaret. Even if it's not with me. Margaret reached across the table and touched his hand. Just once. Thank you, she said. For what? For letting me go. Margaret called Thomas as soon as she left the cafe. How did it go? He asked. Can I come over? Margaret said. Of course. 20 minutes later, Margaret was at his door. Thomas opened it immediately. He didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his arms. Margaret buried her face in his chest and cried. Not because she was sad, but because she was free. He wanted me back, she whispered. Thomas's arms tightened around her. What did you say? I said no. Thomas pulled back and looked at her. Are you sure? Yes, Margaret said. I'm sure. Why? Margaret looked up at him. Because he didn't choose me when it mattered. But you do. Every single day. Thomas cupped her face in his hands. Margaret, I will always choose you. I know, she said. And that's why I chose you. Thomas kissed her. Soft. Gentle. Full of promise. When they pulled apart, Margaret smiled. I love you, she said. It was the first time she'd said it out loud. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. They stood there in his doorway, holding each other. Two people who had been broken. Two people who had been lost. Now found. A year passed. Margaret moved into Thomas's house by the bay. It wasn't a quick decision. They talked about it for months. Weighed the options. Made sure it was what they both wanted. Claire and Michael loved Thomas like family now. Eleanor, Thomas's mother, asked about Margaret every time he visited. Is your sweetheart coming today? She'd ask. And Thomas would smile. Yes, Mom. She's coming. Margaret still worked at the bookstore. Thomas still took long walks. But now they did it together. One Saturday morning, they were sitting on the back porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. I've been thinking, Thomas said. About what? About us. Margaret set her cup down. Okay. Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Margaret's breath caught. Thomas, I know we said we didn't need to get married, Thomas said. I know we said what we have is enough. And it is. But I want to ask you anyway. He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring. Margaret, Thomas said. Will you marry me? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She thought about everything that had brought her here. The pain, the loss, the doubt, the fear, and finally the choice. The choice to be seen. The choice to be loved. The choice to start again. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Thomas slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. They got married on a Sunday afternoon in October. It was a small ceremony. Just family and a few close friends. Claire and Michael stood beside Margaret. Thomas's brother stood beside him. Eleanor sat in the front row, a white rose pinned to her sweater. The ceremony was held in a garden overlooking the bay. The leaves were gold and red. The air was cool and crisp. When it was time for the vows, Thomas took Margaret's hands. Margaret, he said, when I met you, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd missed my chance at love. But you showed me something. You showed me that it's never too late. That love doesn't have an expiration date. That choosing someone every single day is what makes a life worth living. Margaret's tears fell freely. Thomas, she said, you saw me when I couldn't see myself. You chose me when I thought no one would. You loved me not in spite of my brokenness, but because of it. And I promised to choose you, every single day, for the rest of my life. The officiant smiled. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Thomas kissed Margaret. And everyone stood and clapped. After the ceremony, they had a small reception. There was cake, music, laughter. Claire pulled Margaret aside at one point. Mom, she said, you look so happy. Margaret hugged her daughter. I am. I'm so proud of you, Claire said. You could have stayed stuck. But you didn't. You chose to live. I almost didn't, Margaret admitted. But you did, Claire said. And that's what matters. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, Margaret and Thomas sat on the porch. The stars were bright. The air was still. Can you believe it? Margaret said. A year ago, I thought my life was over. And now? Thomas asked. Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder. Now I know it was just beginning. Thomas kissed the top of her head. I love you, Margaret. I love you too. They sat there in the quiet. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right time. Not too early. Not too late. But exactly when they needed to. 5 years passed. Margaret was 62 now. Thomas was 67. They still lived in the house by the bay. Eleanor had passed away peacefully 2 years ago. Margaret and Thomas had been with her. Claire had a second child now. A boy named Thomas. Michael's daughter Sophie was starting kindergarten. Every Sunday, the whole family gathered for dinner. Margaret cooked. Thomas set the table. The children ran through the house laughing. And Margaret would stand in the kitchen, watching it all, and think, this is what love looks like. Not perfect. Not without pain. But real. One evening, after everyone had gone home, Thomas found Margaret standing on the porch, looking out at the water. What are you thinking about? He asked. Margaret smiled. I was thinking about that night at the restaurant. When you first saw me. I remember. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't said something? Margaret asked. Thomas wrapped his arms around her from behind. No. Because I knew I had to. How did you know? Because, Thomas said, I saw someone who needed to be seen. And I needed to see someone. And that seemed like fate to me. Margaret leaned back against him. Do you believe in fate? I believe in choices, Thomas said. And I believe I made the right one. Margaret turned in his arms. So did I. They kissed. Soft. Gentle. Full of 5 years of love. And Margaret realized something. At 57, she had thought love was over. But it wasn't. It was just beginning. Because true love doesn't have an age. It doesn't have a timeline. It just needs 2 people brave enough to choose it. Every single day. Love doesn't end just because time passes. It doesn't fade just because we get older. Sometimes love comes when we least expect it. When we're broken. When we're lost. When we think we're not worth choosing. But the truth is this. You are always worth choosing. At any age. In any season. Love is not about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about seeing someone. Really seeing them. And letting them see you. Margaret thought love was over. But she was wrong. Because love is never over. Not as long as we're still here. Not as long as we're still willing to try. So if you're wondering if it's too late for you, it's not. It's never too late. Not for love. Not for hope. Not for a second chance. All you have to do is choose. Choose to be seen. Choose to be open. Choose to believe that you are worthy. Because you are. You always have been. And you always will be. The end. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today.